This is showbiz. Hey, we're live. It's the Mindstate Marketing Hour. And guess what? We've got Will Leach and we got a special guest today. Will, you want to introduce her and then I'll run the intro?
I do. To our, what is the name of the song again, Steve?
This is Feeding the Ducks.
Feeding the Ducks. That's our that's our theme music. I love it. So, and Steve, before I even do that, well, actually, you're starting to look now. Like if you're watching guys live, Steve's head is really big right now. It's not usually that big. So he must be thinking big thoughts for a big head. Hey everybody, welcome to the Mindstate Marketing Hour. I have the pleasure of, and we have the pleasure, there you go, Steve, of listening and speaking with Brooke Tully. Brooke, I'm going to do a very quick halo and kind of a little bit, but I want you to talk a little bit more about you and your background. And for those of you who have been listening to Mindstate Marketing Hour, we love to bring in guests sometimes. And what we do on these shows when we bring in guests is we kind of have two different kind of a rotation, right? First is I want to know about behavioral science and how you, Brooke, are using it in your own business to grow. You have a business just like we all do. But Steve, I don't know if you know this. Brooke actually has something beyond what you and I, she's special, right? You and I, we use behavioral sciences to grow businesses. She uses behavioral science to create movement. So she can look in the mirror and smile every day. You know, she's doing good things for the world. So Brooke, if we can have you a little bit of it, you're gonna sleep well, right? You're gonna talk a little bit about how you're using behavioral sciences to basically change the world, which is an incredibly important and powerful thing. So for those of you who do not know Brooke, Brooke specializes in helping companies use behavioral insights and communications, and I said to protect the planet, something very big. And today, like we said, we're going to share your perspective on social movements, but also, you know, a lot of our readers or viewers, I guess, Brooke, they're small business owners, they're medium-sized business owners. They're on this podcast because they just know that behavioral science is important. And so how can they better their business marketing, things like that as well. So we're going to kind of take it in those two directions. So we're incredibly excited to have you on the show today. Like Brooke, everybody knows you, everybody loves you, everybody wants to be you. Welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I've enjoyed watching some of your other shows, and I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us today.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you. So do you know, I don't know how we know each other. I must have been through LinkedIn. I don't know how I became aware of you, but I've been following you for the better part of a year now, I think.
Awesome. Thank you.
And it's really exciting to see you, but also other people in the industry are taking just the power of behavioral insights for good is the best way I can think about it, right? And there's so many different ways of using behavioral sciences. We tend to think about the world of marketing. That's our world that we come into, but there's so many other applications. And so with that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? What kind of kid were you like? Where do you live now? But really, I want to know that story behind, there was a day, Brooke, that you were introduced to behavioral science. There was a day and you were like, wow, this is amazing and fascinating because you're using it in your business now. So tell me about that story and then how you're using it.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably skip over all the childhood years because we probably don't have quite that much time today. And I'm not sure you want a therapy session going on here anyway. But it's an interesting question that you ask in terms of what's that day, that moment where I realized that behavioral science is interesting. And I sort of feel like there's two parts of that. There's sort of maybe an innate or intuitive understanding or phase of life where you realize understanding humans and understanding human psychology and how people behave is important. And then you have that moment of you're like, oh, that's behavioral science. And those aren't necessarily at the exact same time. And I grew up, my dad's a psychologist. So there was a lot of sort of, human behavior psychology happening around me anyway. I was a quiet, introverted kid, which meant I watched people, and I would watch how they interact and how they communicate, and started to form all these thoughts about what seems to work well and what doesn't seem to work well. So I was sort of always studying humans, even before I knew I was studying humans. And when it came time, that time of life of, what do you want to be and what's your major and what's going to be your professional track, it was a little confusing at that time. And so I was looking at sociology, I was looking at psychology, and I was looking at advertising. and ended up taking the advertising track.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's
yeah,
amazing. I
so
love it. Okay.
I spent the first decade of my career working at ad agencies in New York City.
Okay.
And that's an amazing playground of, we might be using behavioral science techniques, but we may not know that we are, and we may not understand totally what works and why it works when it does work, and vice versa, why it doesn't work.
Right.
And that's an awesome world of like qualitative research, audience research, understanding what it will take to get someone to buy a product or become loyal to a brand or, care about a topic. I was working on telecommunications. So like, why would anybody care about who their telecom provider is and feel some sort of way about it? Not just who they are, but like have some affinity for their telecom provider. I made sort of that career switch into conservation after, I was probably already 8 years into advertising, feeling like I want to do more with like, sort of in the meta level, like with the time I have here on Earth, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
like
the thing.
Crisis or something. All right. Yeah.
Exactly. So like, people have midlife crises, and then they talk about the quarter life crisis, and I was hitting that almost to the T. I was,
me too.
Mid to late 20s, saying there's got to be more out there, and I had to go through a whole process of discovering what I cared about. I very much am, I'm Gen X, and it was find your corporate ladder, climb it, stick to it, go for it. And like purpose and passion wasn't so much talked about.
That's right. That's right.
And, in younger generations, like that's kind of getting instilled at a really early age. So I had to figure out what I was passionate about. And I thankfully found like an amazing vocational coach, which is such a like niche topic. But, if you need one, find one. I can't, oversell it enough about how valuable that kind of coach is in your life. And landed on wildlife, like wildlife conservation, caring about animals. And, I said my dad's a psychologist, but he's also a professor of psychology, which meant he did teach some animal behavior 101 courses, grew up with a lot of Jane Goodall videos and movies at home. And I found myself like bawling at a Nat Geo TV series one day about elephants, just like couldn't pull myself together from it. And I said, oh, maybe this is something I'm passionate about. Yeah,
maybe, right? The tears may have given you a clue.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, I'm really losing it here. So maybe this is a sign. And, that's not an easy transition. What does someone with an advertising background do in a very heavily science-based field? And so my first foot in the door was on the marketing side. I became a marketing director. I was working at a nonprofit that actually specializes in using behavior. They call it like behavior change techniques. We weren't yet at like the behavior science terminology at that stage, but behavior change for conservation using some marketing techniques. So that was sort of like, oh, there's this world I didn't know about. And I came in as marketing director and eventually moved over to the programmatic side, where I was actually working directly with partners in the field to run behavior change campaigns. And I think it was in that transition that, moving to the programmatic side and really working on these, real world projects using these marketing and behavior science techniques is where it was, all the dots finally connected. I wasn't actually making a complete career transition. I was kind of blending worlds together, taking all that advertising knowledge and background, learning what I'm learning firsthand about conservation, also happening at a time where behavior science is like suddenly exploding in popularity in terms of accessibility, and saying, oh, I get this now. Like I get how this all connects and how this is, the next stage of my career path.
Yeah. What I love about what you did, Steve, you and I have talked about this actually in a couple of the questions we get. I'll get asked this question a lot from, I'm sure you do too. You get students or you get people asking you every so often, like, what advice would you give somebody who's going to start their career or start a business? And I always say, if you can find two passions, I don't care what passions they are, by the way, if you can find a way to merge those together, you will be differentiated and you will have passion to keep going through all the obstacles that you have to go through all the time. And it sounds like you did something similar. You may not even known those were your passions, but I did it with behavioral science, and I'm not a psychologist. I never took any of this course in school, but I'm that guy who just started reading the classic Predictably Irrational, blew my mind. I was an economist. And when I read that book, that changed everything for me. But then I was also in marketing. And so I started thinking kind of, you went through this whole thing of seeing dots connected. And all of a sudden one day I decided I can't find a business that will let me do what I want to do. So I'll go create my own. And I didn't want to be an entrepreneur or anything else. So I love that idea of your two passions. We've talked a lot about that, Steve, about if you can connect those things, it's everything,
Yeah. Plus a skill. Like you need to have a skill in there too.
Yeah. No, yeah. And I think that's what creates your skill, actually. Like I didn't have that skill. I knew how to think, but because I had these two passions, it forced me to create a model. And also writing the book helped me. Steve and I have talked about this too. Writing a book forces you to really hone in on your ideas, make them applicable, see the bullshit that you thought about and go, oh, that's actually not true. I had that thought, but now that I'm actually exploring it, that's not true. So doing that also helps you build out that skill quite a bit.
Yeah, I haven't written a book yet, but when I first developed my online course, it was those were the tension points of, putting your money where your mouth is, really, of like, I have these ideas, I have all these criticisms, and I have all these, big opinions, but, and basically those opinions are, I would do it differently. And it's like, now I need to do it differently. And like, what is that?
What do I do?
Like, how do I make something new that meets my own standards of what I think good looks like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Brooke, you were talking about watching the Nat Geo thing about elephants, and I've had those moments too, but it triggered a conviction in you to take an action. Talk to us about that.
Interesting. Yeah. So in the stage when I was sort of discovering my passions, I sort of had like a top 3 of things that I was really interested in. And part of the work with the vocational coach was tie the threads back through your life. Like, is this something that's just in the moment now, or is this something that you felt consistently over time at various stages of life?
Great point.
And that was the one that, I think kind of going back to my dad and the Jane Goodall movies and a love of animals, I think I could see that being something that did move me at all ages, so, to date to that point, and Will, to what you said before about like the passions help you have that resilience. And I think that's what helps, is that of the top 3, that was the one that just felt like it was most ingrained in me already. And that I saw I had sort of a unique skill set that I could offer to that world. And even that was sort of, I had to figure that out. The first is like, how do I adjust myself to have the skill set that world requires? Yep. And then to say, actually, that's not the route. I don't want to go back to school and, get a, biology degree. And I played with all of those ideas. I couldn't bring myself to like go back to school again. I was like, I did that, I just want to move on from this point. And so then it was, kind of, again, those dots connecting of maybe I have something to offer here, because again, back to the resilience thing, in the advertising world, I started to lose that resilience. I started to feel like I can't keep doing campaign after campaign. Some of them end up live, some of them go dead in the water, and the nights, the weekends, I just can't keep pouring myself into this. And I think that's part of the self-awareness I needed to have, is that whatever I do, I'm going to pour a lot of myself into it, and it's got to be worth it for me. And, again, kind of at that meta level, like for the greater good.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you. So I want to talk a lot more later on about, you were using behavioral science, behavioral marketing, however we want to term it, for conservation efforts. Mm-hmm. But there is a point where you probably have bills, is my guess. You probably have a few bills, right? You have some expenses. So you have to monetize your passion. And like we all do. I want to say, if you can find those two passions and pull them together, great. That's awesome. But you want to monetize if you want that to be your career. And that's the best career you can have, is when you are working on your passions. So tell us a little bit about what you do now. And then I want to talk a little bit about, like, you at some point have to break out. Your field is more crowded, and you probably know it better than I do. I see more and more people talking and using behavioral sciences in financial services, healthcare, and in conservation, environmental issues. Those are the three big investment areas that I see the most. And so you've had to monetize that. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but talk about that decision. What do you do now? And then how are you monetizing it?
Yeah. And so previously when I first started, I was, employed. I was working for a nonprofit. So that helped pay the bills. And then I made the decision to go off on my own. And part of that was, I hit a strategic ceiling in my organization of, I started again having those big opinions, big ideas of how things should get done, spent about 2 years trying to pitch those ideas internally and realized it's not going to happen here. So do I just go and make it happen? And I think probably with a lot of people who start, like, I didn't necessarily think I was starting my own business. Like I went off like as a consultant. So I want to freelance, for all intents and purposes is, I'm going to get hired on projects and some contracts and stuff like that. And that's a learning journey to figure out what kind of freelance or consultant I want to be, what's going to be a good fit in terms of clients. But again, I had that moment of, I really, on a one-to-one level, I can only help so many people apply these principles and best practices. And I want to help more. I want to help more practitioners use these insights in their day-to-day work. And that gets into, this is, the topic of scale, essentially. So how do you scale something like this? Although, I'm not thinking about scale necessarily in like, I want to go big, but it's part of that, right? I want to spread this knowledge to more people. And that's where I decided to start creating courses. So I really only have one like flagship course. It's called Making Moves. It's my 8-week live course. That's a product. So, now I'm kind of developing products and I still have my consulting services with that. Right now it's like a 50-50 split of products, courses, and some that I'm continuing to develop. So I have more products and working directly with clients as a consultant. And the topic, especially in conservation, environmentalism, the nonprofit field, which is most of my clients, the idea of monetizing this is like you don't really want to talk about.
I know.
It's not because I'm a for-profit entity. That's essentially what I am.
Yeah.
Providing services to government agencies and nonprofits.
So tell me about, like I said, I think that your world is becoming more and more crowded with for-profit agencies. Many of them have much bigger budgets than you'd have, and they have lots of think tanks, and they work with these professors and stuff like that. So you're out there competing against that. Are you using any of your own kind of recipes, if you will, to help stand out from the crowd?
I do, and certainly it's a learning journey too to figure out, the landscape, the competitive landscape continues to shift and grow. It's growing pretty rapidly. So there's a lot of things I have to like stay on the ball with a lot of it. The things I try to do to differentiate, and interesting, the episode that you sent me to watch with Brian Soy about, the bringing the humanness to brands. That really resonated with me because I feel like that's part of what I try to do. I mean, like McKinsey might have an environmental consulting arm, but, that's sort of a formula. It's, a machine. And when you get me, you get me. You get me at the other end of the email. You get me on all the calls. In my course, like I'm reviewing everyone's worksheet if they want me to review a worksheet. Like I'm giving you direct guidance. And so trying to be as real of a person as I can be, that's present and there and paying attention. And like I said before, like I give a shit. Like I pour myself into this work. And so that I'm showing up because I care, and I'm probably spending extra time on it too because I care. I think a few other things I try to do is there's this ongoing disconnect. And I think this is with behavioral science, regardless of what sector you're looking at, is this giant layer of theory, giant layer of research that's contributing to theories or debunking theories. And then there's practical application of it all. And there's typically this really huge gap between those two of all these theories are overwhelming. There's so many different things. Now we're arguing if loss aversion is real or not real. And it gets confusing, and your average person who's a practitioner doesn't have time to figure all of this out. Or they go to a behavior science conference and they're like, oh, these ideas are amazing. And they get back to their desk and they're like, I don't know how to use any of these. What do I do with social proof? Like, I'm not sure. So I think one of my differentiators is I think of myself often as like a translator between theory and practical application, and getting it to a place where you can start using it today in these, sometimes simple word changes that will help move the needle forward that you haven't been using before. And I'll explain to you why it works. You'll know all the theories, all the rationale, but all you have to do is change from I to we. And look, we have, some belonging in there. And, lastly, I'm just trying to make it a little bit fun. The topic is hard to work in. Like, resilience is tough to muster on a regular basis. So if we can make some of these things a little bit more fun and be a little bit light with it, even though the topics aren't light, I think it will help me maybe stand out from some of these bigger entities that maybe their brand guidelines won't necessarily let them do the things or say the things that I do with my own made up brand guidelines.
Sure.
So Brooke, when you talk about movements, what are kind of like the top 3 things that relate to a brand or a business that they would want to acknowledge if they're interested in creating some way of a movement to help people connect better with them?
Yeah, awesome. And actually, so the theory that I like to use to describe how movements start and grow is the diffusion of innovation theory, which originally was created to explain how like technology or the adoption of technology spreads. So it sort of comes from that brand product place. But you can see how, the adoption of something like smartphones is not a far stretch from the adoption of a behavior like wearing masks or, reducing your water use at home. And, I think that the biggest challenge we have, again, whether you're a brand, commercial product, a social movement, is the first folks that get on board are essentially our loyal followers, our fan base, our choir. And it's so comfortable talking to that group. It's so comfortable selling to that group because you have to do very little. Like iPhone can say nothing or Apple can say nothing, and there's a line out the door for their next iPhone. People sleeping out overnight. Like, that takes little to no work on their end to get that audience. And it's really easy to then stop with that audience. And because everything after that takes more effort, you have to change your communication strategy. You have to change your outreach strategy. You have to use entirely different behavioral levers at that point. And we
face criticism. Yeah, there's all sorts of dangers that come with that. Sure.
Yeah, because then that's when, the skepticism comes in. That's when, and that's when it risks not taking off. Because, you can stay in this sort of safe band of always being at a certain level. But if you really want to have growth, then you need to push beyond that level, and you need to use different strategies to get there. And part of that comes down to knowing who that audience is outside of your fan base. What would interest the rest of that next audience segment? What would activate them on this topic? And how can you make it relevant to them? And that's where we have to get more creative. We have to get more strategic, because it may not be obvious to us of why this thing matters to them.
Yep. Let me ask you, we're gonna take a step back, but I thought of this. So you come from the agency world, marketing, advertising for many, many years. You're one of the few people that we've interviewed who decided to really create a personal brand versus you could have created a name of a company or whatever. And it's very deliberate, by the way, I think. Can you help me understand? It goes back to, honestly, you're being more human. That's a point of differentiation. You're the person behind the email or whatever. Maybe that's by design. But can you tell me through that decision of why did you choose to kind of really focus on your personal brand versus trying to create a typical brand that we would have expected, like, World Wildlife Fund, whatever?
Yeah. This has been such a journey, actually. And it's, as anybody knows, it's sort of a process. initially I was thinking of my brand being Brooke's 2 Cents. And that's like a blog that I had a way back. And I was like, Brooke's 2 Cents is like my opinion and it's fun. And I got some feedback from some mentors who I very much value telling me to not do that, to being like, no, that undercuts your credibility because you're being a little bit like, too, self-degrading kind of thing.
Okay.
And I mean, those are such tough truths to swallow in business. It's like, I feel sort of emotionally tied to this name. I kind of want to go that way. And then someone says that's a bad idea. And you have to just, embrace it. And it's so hard to just, pivot at that point.
Uh-huh.
So part of it is I didn't have a better name. So might as well just go with my own name.
It was available on GoDaddy.
I mean, that's part of why I changed my name when I got married, because my maiden name URL was not available, but my married name was, and might as well get that .com while I can.
Yeah, right.
And so I didn't have necessarily a better name, and I was influenced by folks like Paul Jarvis. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and he has a great book too, A Company of One, that talks all about like running a company that doesn't necessarily have to get bigger.
Want to grow, yeah. I remember.
Yeah, that you can, enough is good enough, and that you can make a very like sustainable lifestyle by having a company of one. I was following him for a while, and he does create products that have product names, and courses that would have course names that could eventually live beyond him. But what I subscribed to with his newsletter, when I followed him online, I was following him as a person.
Yeah.
And I sort of liked that model. And I felt like it was a model that would really allow me to infuse, I'm going to say, the brand with all the different elements of me, and not really have to worry about sort of, the brand. Again, I'm going to say brand guidelines, so to speak.
Yeah.
And again, I'm coming back to the conversation you had with Brian Sawyers. I know there was a lot of that, like, does the CEO set the tone of the brand, and how does that trickle down? And what happens if the CEO's personality isn't a great one? Like, what do we do then?
Right.
And so I saw this as an opportunity to really just have an avenue where I could be fully me and provide the things, the sort of training and ideas I wanted to provide.
Cool.
So Brooke, so what particular success story are you proud of?
Personally, or in like?
Well, in creating a movement. Right?
Mm.
Oh, this is a great one. I wasn't prepared for this one, Steve.
Steve never reads my stuff.
There's. I'm going to throw one out that's a little bit kind of back in my history a little bit, because it's one that I like to use as a case study in my course too, and it's one that's just very near and dear to my heart. So I like to use that one as an example. But it was a catch and release fishing project in Northeast Mongolia. So first of all, like, I got to be in Mongolia, which is, very few people get a chance to say that or do that. And it was a very small scale conservation project, but there is this amazing fish species there called a taimen. It's related to like the salmon family, and they get massive. They can get up to like 5 feet, 6 feet long, huge predator fish, big sport fish. And a lot of folks who lived in the villages along this river like to recreationally go out and catch this fish. It was not a source of food. It was a source of fun. But it's a very important fish for the ecosystem because they're predators. And when you lose the predators, everything else kind of goes out of balance. And the whole project was, how do we shift away from kind of catch and kill or catch and keep fishing towards catch and release fishing? And we saw just really in 2 years' time, this entire shift and excitement around not bragging about the size of the head of the fish that you have in the house, but the photo of the fish that you caught and released. And, it still provided, so it still met that human need.
For
And the
steam.
human, status, bragging rights, popularity, recognition. So it still ticked all of those boxes while having a benefit for conservation and for the ecosystem of having that fish go back in there. And we brought up things like, taking a picture of your catch wasn't really popular. It wasn't really done then. So kind of introducing that behavior. The idea of you're putting it back and let's see if your buddy can catch it. That sort of increased kind of gamification of it. Who else can rein in that beast of a fish. And, again, in just 2 years' time, that now became the norm. To the point where the fishers that we were working in were telling other fishers to release it. They were becoming local guides for people who came in out of town to fish. And they were now, instead of the authorities, so I was working with World Wildlife Fund at that time, instead of them always having to be that front line of defense of, don't do this or make sure you release it. Now the fishing community itself was, kind of self-regulating. And that's the dream right there, is when you make it into such a social norm that the peer-to-peer communication and enforcement is happening, and you don't have to keep plugging quite as much resources into making it happen.
Excellent.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that, so you were, probably a consultant at the time or whatever, you said it was a ways back, right? But then you created both communications and we think of the world of nudges. I hate using that term, but these nudges, you created a process, a behavioral, some kind of an activation thing that would cause people to change behavior. Is that kind of what you're teaching in your courses now too? Like there is a particular conservation behavior you're trying to do, and you're teaching these types of things. It could be through communications, it could be through nudges, it could be through other systems. That's what you're doing in your course? Yeah,
I sort of tackle behavior change from kind of two angles. One is like, what's the strategy we're designing? So like you said, there's a conservation behavior goal. We want people to eat less meat, use less water in their house, protect a certain species, pollinator-friendly gardens. Like there's sort of a very long list that comes into the course of different conservation or sustainability behaviors. Yeah. And then we look at what's the strategy to get the audience. Let's say they're at 0 right now, so they're not doing any of this, to there. Because I think a mistake that often is made is that it's like it's point A to point B. You kind of like just leapfrogging to this new behavior. But I sort of adapted the process of designing like consumer journeys into behavior journeys for conservation. Like, with the Mongolia example, you had to give training workshops. We had to engage the fishers. Maybe they weren't necessarily, they weren't actually a like community group. We had to start treating them like a club. Yeah. That's a whole half a year process right there. Then we start providing new skills and new tools. Then we have to kind of rally the community around that. So I start with the strategy, and then the next layer is, how does this manifest in outreach and communication efforts? And then messages. So what is the billboard going to look like? What's the website and the social media posts? And how do we really leverage these, whether it's nudges or other kind of behavioral science techniques, and merge them with the communication strategies, so that it does become external, visible, and ideally pretty powerful.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So let me ask you a question. So, we work with brands, both Steve and I work with, some big brands, some smaller brands. And I would say that almost every brand we're working on, some of these are the biggest brands, are legitimately trying to do better things for the environment, in particular, social movements as well. But I see a lot of mistakes that they make. They invest tons of money, millions and millions of dollars, but then they don't oftentimes see a return. Either they're not, acknowledged for it, or the behavioral changes they want doesn't happen. So I worked on Sun Chips long, long time ago when we created the very first biodegradable or compostable bag, as I should say, compostable packaging. It was a multi-million-dollar investment from PepsiCo. It was way ahead of its time. But one thing we weren't skilled enough, and I wasn't skilled enough to do this either, was you can still take that package and you throw it in a landfill and it doesn't decompose. You had to buy a composter. You had to actually do composting. And so I would suffice to say it didn't do very well. There's other things it didn't do well. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see that companies are trying to do better? They're trying to do things to improve the environment, to improve diversity and inclusion. They're trying to do things, but they don't have your skills. Like, what's that big mistake that you wish you could kind of just tell them not to make?
Yeah, I'll probably lay out maybe two. I wish I could pick one. I'm never good at that. One is, I find this instinct. I've seen it with ad agencies too, that work on like pro bono projects for a conservation group. It's like everything they knew about advertising, they somehow forget when it comes to a social good or an environmental good. And they just go right back to awareness raising and information giving and facts, or worse, they go into like the doom and gloom and the fear and everything you're going to lose if you don't act now. Like, and they like all the stuff that they would use for Sprite or Sun Chips or something else. It's like they never apply it to social good. And like, why not? I mean, that stuff tends to work, and we can apply it to things that are also very serious and very important, and not just browbeat. Like there's so much browbeating all the time of, you should do this and, don't use all that energy and stuff. And it's like, and that's not interesting. And they know it breaks all their rules of like what makes good advertising good.
Yeah.
I think also, related to that, there's sometimes they forget the human element of it, of that these sustainability won't magically happen. It happens through the actions of people. So how do we, like the bag is great, but we need also people to compost. So what's the effort we're going to put in to help build that skill, provide those resources if they're not there yet, and make it possible. I mean, I know there's brands like Reckitt, that sort of like big parent company.
Yep.
They're doing some work of I think for their washing machine detergent, dishwashing detergent, of encouraging people to use cold water, because it cleans just as well and it uses less energy. And that's like the magic of where a brand can bring all of this stuff together. Like they can sell their product and start to infuse a shift in behaviors of how people use that product that's ultimately better for the planet. And when you can kind of find, I would love to see places like Dove and like other soap places do it for, not taking these incredibly long showers, or, anything else that helps lead to sustainability. Like they have the power to do that. And I think they just are not quite sure like how to connect those dots entirely.
No, I fully agree. Go ahead, Steve.
Hey, I got a great question here from Amir. It says, do you think AI will be doing a lot of the behavioral science workforce in the future?
Well, I'm sure it depends on the context, right? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be many areas where it's quite feasible to do that. I mean, hopefully AI can kind of write more of the messages for me as well, so I don't have to do it as much, and do it better than I could ever do it. But yeah, I mean, I think, if we look at, let's say, any kind of digital interaction where AI can play a role, and also realistically, that doesn't exist in all the places where we need change to happen. There's a lot of places where it's not all happening online and it's still very interpersonal. Yeah, I think AI could be, a powerful tool in that. As with all of these tools, it can be used for both good and evil. So I also want to be sure that it's used appropriately. And this is the debate we've had with nudges too. Like, when is a nudge appropriate? When is it being too big brothery? And when is it just, downright harmful? And I think that's some of the challenges we face with AI now is, what is it sourcing its knowledge, its artificial intelligence from? And is that a trustworthy database of human behavior that it will be learning from in order to do the best work it can do?
Yeah, Brooke, I'll build on that too, for you, Amir, too. I think behavioral sciences and artificial intelligence, I was going to say the same thing, Brooke. I would say artificial intelligence can make you, especially as it comes to copy, I think it'll be integrated into copy to where if you're going to run campaigns for 10 different organizations, you can use AI to run 50 messages per organization per day like that. It's good for that. The downside is just like you said, where they source that information, is it even accurate? And then it's funny because behavioral science is in the same space as AI. I think we're in its infancy. Like, it's the Wild West. Like, I've been at conferences and we've had these debates at conferences and there is no answer. Like, people say, where's the line? I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows the line. There's lots of, we're getting better, by the way. I think organizations are starting to come close, at least on the marketing side, and saying, this is where we will stop the use of behavioral sciences and these things that we know. But even 3 years ago, that line wasn't even there. And we can use little things like, well, it has to be used for good. Well, who defines good?
Exactly.
Who defines that good? And so I think we're in like that. I think in 20 or 30 years, my son won't have to have those conversations, but it's going to be a while. I think it is. I think it just is what it is. But I think AI can make our jobs easier and faster and can bring more sophistication, but it can also bring in some pretty bad elements as well, because the user is not equipped to use the AI. They think it's just pressing a button and then whatever gets sent out, send it out. But they don't know the algorithms behind those models that are damaging populations, right?
And I mean, truthfully, advertising has been having arguments about ethics for a really long time. And that's where a lot of this comes down to. And, I think thankfully, too, the field of conservation and sustainability is also having more conversation about ethics. Really? Because it stems from a lot of kind of, roots in, honestly, like colonization and, white privilege, supremacy notions of we know best. So we're going to fly from the US or the UK into a local community and tell you how to solve your environmental issues. And that dynamic is changing. Thankfully, it's, ideally it'd be faster, but, at least it's changing, kind of co-creating solutions of either supporting a local community to develop their own solutions, implement their own solutions, and not just kind of be a top-down, fly in, savior of a local community. But that's where all these things about ethics need to come into play. Like, where is it ethical for us to ask a community, whether it's in another place or at home, to make this change in their behavior? Where is it not ethical? And, I've worked on projects, or I've had people come to me with projects of, we need this local community to stop hunting wild meat from the forest, and they need to eat other meat. Okay, is other meat available? No. That's probably not a project we should be running. But if you're purely coming from a pure conservation, biodiversity perspective, it's hard to factor in that human reality of people need to eat, and we can't stop people from eating, and we shouldn't. And that's then not going to be a viable behavior change goal. We need to kind of take a step back and reassess what is a better strategy, a better plan here. So I think that these ongoing conversations about where the line is, I'm glad they're happening. I think they're going to just have to keep
happening for a while. Yeah. For a while, sure.
All right, kids, this has been a great conversation.
I can't believe it's over already.
Yes, I know. We didn't get very many things. I know. Well, hey, like, so talk a little bit about what are you currently working on? What do you want the audience to know about you? What do you want, where can they find more about you or find out more about you? I mean,
well, certainly go to brooketully.com.
That's that brand.
The URL was available, so you can find it there. I'm taking a little bit of a break in July, just to kind of, again, to like recover and rebuild my resilience. But coming up in the fall, I'm running my course again, starting in September. So if anyone's interested, it's on the website, Making Moves. And I have a kind of a self-guided short course called Messages That Motivate that you can check out. And that's like the fundamentals, the basic. And I'm looking to actually translate that in some other languages. So hopefully have it available in Spanish and French as well. Maybe this year, probably not, probably next year. And, with that, continuing to build out the community of folks who have been through the course already. So we sort of develop an alumni network where we keep the learning and the fun going.
That's great.
All right. Excellent. The whole reason we're here in the Mindstate Marketing Hour is because of Will Leach and his book, Marketing the Mind States. If you don't have his book with a new look, then your messaging is not hitting the mark. Your messaging is a one size fits all. And when you learn about states of mind and how to create great content that can connect with folks from the state of mind that they're in, then you can start to have a big competitive advantage. You can learn more at the mindstategroup.com. Well, you've got to look over your shoulder program? That's what I call it.
I do have a look over my shoulder program. So, we talk about this, and Brooke, you could probably identify with this. We get people, you said it early on, they're just like, I know behavioral science is important. I know I could use it, but I just don't feel comfortable doing it myself. Yep. So what we decided to do was create a program where you can actually schedule a call free of charge. We look at your marketing together, and I show you the way I think about the world of marketing through the world of goal theory, motivational psychology, regulatory fit theory, behavioral economics. And we just sit down with you on these calls to talk about your marketing. We're going to show you some things that you're doing very well and probably a few things you can optimize, but it just gives you a chance to work with a professional on your marketing to hopefully get, messages that get your customers to listen, care, and act. So that's what we do on my website, mindstategroup.com. There's these big red boxes that says, I think it says schedule a free consult. So if you do that, you will talk to me as well, Brooke. I love what you said, the human nature. Some people are like, I didn't think I'd actually talk to you. Like, no, I love this stuff. I can't get enough of it. So you will actually talk to me. I'm not going to hand you over to Steve Brown, though he can do some other things for you. But I'm going to talk to you about the behavioral science of marketing.
That's right. And so, Brooke, tell us again, what's the website for the second course you mentioned?
It's best to get there through my regular website. So if you go to brooketully.com under workshops, you'll find, should be the second or third option, is messages that motivate. And thank you for your interest in that. I'm excited for that.
Yeah. And that's Brooke with an E, BROOKE, Tully, TULLY.com.
Yes, sir.
Brooke, you've been a great guest. Thank you for being on here.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and let me know if you ever want me to come back and we can keep going.
We can. You can teach us how to do something impactful as well. Me and Steve we got to work on our thing, Steve, you and I. We're going to work on.
We do.
Something besides marketing toilet paper and podcasts and stuff like that. Exactly. Though that's very important. That's very important to my clients. It's very important.
Well, I was excited when I saw movements in the title, but then I realized we're talking about other kinds of. So anyway.
Yeah, we forget the other client. That's right.
Yeah. Toilet humor is big in my family. So no worries.
Did you know that we're a podcast as well? Be sure to subscribe and listen on any of your favorite podcast providers. And then we've also got a YouTube channel. It's the Mindstate channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, do all the things that the cool kids do. Brooke, any last words for us?
Oh, goodness. Great one.
Right on the spot.
Yes. I believe everyone can do this. You can make small strategic shifts in how we communicate, whether it's at home or with external audiences, to get more action, engagement, excitement, inspiration, and ultimately more engagement and movement. So you can do it too. We can all do it.
I like it.
Excellent. Any little last words?
No, I can't top that, to be honest with you. She took it. So you guys go do great things. Be compelling in your marketing. Make the world a better place. Go do it.
And I'll let Michael speak for me. Well done, Brooke. Great story.
Visual blending. I like that. Hashtag.
I do too. I like that.
All right. We'll see you guys next show.
Next show. That's right. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I know.
Thanks so much, y'all.